Good afternoon. We aren't going to blink the lights, but we will ask you to please take a seat as we begin to start our program. I do, as an educator told me one time, said in elementary school when they want the students to get quiet, the teacher just raises her hand. So we'll just hold the hand up. Amazing how that works, right? Reverend Ford. So how's everyone today? Fantastic. It's an outstanding day to be here. It's beautiful outside. The last week or so, the weather's been outstanding. It's great to be able to get back out again and to fellowship, see people in person. I have my mask, so occasionally I put it on and sometimes I take it off. So you may see me with that on at some point in time. But we're great to be here today. My name is Nigel Alston. I am the Executive Director of the North Carolina Black Repertory Company, producers of the National Black Theater Festival. And they tell me that I'm your MC today, and I will be stacking aces throughout today. What that means is, at some point, or points, I will be asking you for money over and over. You're all already aware of that, right? I just want to preface here early so you know what to expect as we continue to go through the day. Well, for us to thrive, our children need to thrive, and when they thrive, we all thrive. Unfortunately, we have too many situations within our community and children who suffer adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. I learned a new term today. I understand about adverse childhood experiences, but I didn't know it was called ACEs. So I've learned something new today. And that comes in various forms of abuse and neglect. So today we're going to stack the deck against this abuse and neglect and adverse childhood experiences through education, through awareness, through recognition, and through the keynote speech that we will hear later on today. Every day, children in our community face an epidemic, and that epidemic has been exacerbated by the pandemic known as COVID-19. How many of you are happy that we're at a different place than we were 2 years ago? Round of applause, right? So that's why today we're going to start a conversation about childhood trauma and how ACEs are linked to many adult challenges such as chronic physical and mental health problems, substance abuse, job stability, and earning potential. Fortunately for us, we have an organization, Family Services, in our community that offers a community of solutions to help mitigate ACEs. But we also know that our community can't adequately address this issue without extensive knowledge, some of which we'll learn today, about the root cause, who is affected, and why. I've had the opportunity to be involved and associated with Family Services for quite some period of time, working with Bob, the former president and CEO, and the leadership team, offering some training. External to that, being engaged with them in terms of the services that they offer into the community. So I'm well aware of the good work that they do and the people that are there, and that the baton has been passed, and a new person is here now who is excited about being here in this community doing what she loves. To be able to do this, we also need people who believe in us and who support us, and so we are especially grateful to our presenting sponsor, Bethany Medical, and the Lenny Peters Foundation. If you would give them a round of applause. So it's my pleasure this time to introduce Elise Peters Carey, President of Bethany Medical and Director of the Lenny Peters Foundation, to the stage for remarks.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. On behalf of Bethany Medical and the Lenny Peters Foundation, I'm so grateful to all of you for being here today. Bethany Medical and the Foundation support others in the community that have missions that align with our mission. And I'd like to share for a few minutes how I believe our mission is aligned with that of Family Services. Bethany Medical is focused on serving the community as the largest independent provider of medical services for over 35 years. We are open 7 days a week, offering primary care, urgent care, and specialty care at our 15 locations. Bethany Medical is staffed with board-certified physicians and providers representing 15 medical specialties, and we pride ourselves on treating our patients with compassion and care. We employ over 500 team members across the triad. The name Bethany, as recounted in the Bible, is the house where Martha, Mary, and Lazarus came together. They were very different types of people, united by their love for Jesus. At Bethany, we are made up of many different types of people from diverse backgrounds, and we are united by our care and compassion for our patients and for fellow mankind. And our logo is representative of that and is a door where we welcome all to walk through. The Lenny Peters Foundation is a charitable organization focused to assist those around the world and closer to home here in the Triad. Founded by my dad, Dr. Lenny Peters, the foundation recognizes and focuses on the needs of individuals in the local area, particularly those who find themselves experiencing temporary, one-time financial hardships and need help to get back on track. Dr. Peters, who is a strong believer in philanthropy, has provided financial support over the years through the Lenny Peters Foundation. Many recipients have been helped through his donations to Family Services, United Way, and other great organizations, and even some of his own team members received aid to help with financial hardships. The opportunities provided by education for my family and our roots in India led the foundation to sponsor 8 homes in India and 2 in South Africa, giving shelter, food, and education to hundreds of orphans, the sick, and the elderly, and this support continues today. I myself have had a chance to visit one of these orphanages in India and was humbled by the children's determination. Bethany Medical and the Foundation's focus on the community, our mission to support those from diverse backgrounds, and our passion to help children with their education is what has led us to become a partner of Family Services of Forsyth, specifically Raising Every Child. We believe that the first 5 years of every child's life are critical. We want to make sure that all children in Forsyth County have the ability to reach their full potential. As I reflect as a parent for my 3 kids, Adeline 5, Isabel 3, and Edward 18 months, and the way as a parent, and as many do, want for their kids to achieve their goals through opportunities, I am excited about what we're here today to do for the children in Forsyth County. Bethany Medical and the Lenny Peters Foundation are excited to support this event that will make it possible for the children in our community to seek every opportunity. Thank you.
Let's thank Bethany Medical and the Foundation again for their outstanding support. Thank you for sharing that with us today, Elise. Every day, or almost every day, I've taken a pause. I take a picture of a crepe myrtle in various stages, usually without any leaves, and then with them coming back, and then in full blossom, and sometimes with the snow. And the caption is, and this is all I put as the Reverend Ford comes forward, is "This is the day." I think you all know what follows that, right? And it says we should rejoice and be glad in it. So this is the day, and at this time, the Reverend Paul Ford, who's the Vice Chair of the Family Services Board of Directors, is going to come forward and lead us in raising our gratitude.
Good afternoon to everyone. Throughout history, people from every walk of life have paused before a meal to give thanks not only for the food, but for the fellowship that it facilitates. And so we pause now with a word of reflection and a word of prayer. In writing on children, the poet Khalil Gibran described parents as, quote, the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. And he could have just as easily ascribed this life-propelling archery to every teacher, mentor, counselor, and adult who influences the lives of young people. The research and the insights that we will be discussing today empower us to make sure that all of our young people can be sent forth into the world to live full and prosperous lives that build and uplift their communities. But these insights also prove that no child, as we have been led to believe, is beyond reach if we are willing to move forward with wisdom and with courage. And so we ask right now for that courage, and we ask for that wisdom as we gather today, giving thanks for the passion and the purpose that has brought us here, for the food that we are about to partake of, and for the work that lies ahead. Some pray in the name of the one, others pray in the name of the many. Many of us pray in the name of those who have gone before us. In all of those names, let us say, amen.
So thank you, Reverend Ford. So it is the time where you get to break open the boxes. Enjoy your lunch. Be prepared for me stacking the deck against you again. After we come back, we'll have some recognition, presentation, and then conclude with the day by asking you to open up your wallets and give us some money. Enjoy your lunch. Well, please continue to enjoy your food as we resume our program. This time, we'd like to recognize some special guests, and again, our presenting and additional sponsors. As you all are aware, the commitment to raise every child in Forsyth County requires engagement from every sector in our community. Bringing this many people together for such an endeavor is no small feat, so I'd like for you to help me recognize those who are leading these efforts through their volunteer efforts, financial support, advocacy, and public leadership. So as I call out each group, if you would please stand and remain standing. With those who are members of the Family Services Board of Directors, please stand. Foundation Board of Directors, just continue to stand, please. The Grogan Society Leadership Donors, and all elected officials who are here with us today. Let's give them a round of applause, recognizing them for their efforts. I'd also like to draw attention to your program that you have. On the reverse side of it are additional sponsors that we would like to thank as well, corporate, agency, and individual, and we thank them for taking action to help build a better community for all of us. So especially to Bethany Medical, Lenny Peters Foundation, and all of the sponsors that you see on the back of your program. Please give them another round of applause. They make this possible and help us to be able to help children. This time we have two individuals who will come to the stage as I share some additional information with you. And that is Tracy Ross, the new president and CEO, and Bob Fikema, the past president and CEO, who are going to come and present an inaugural Children's Champion Award. You have a deck of cards on your table, stacking the deck against aces, and we're going to continue to talk more about that today. As you arrived, a community of champions has already raised $110,000. That is significant. To create more opportunities for children and families who are stranded on the far side of reaching their potential. Many of you are attending today because of a friend or an organization who invited you to be here to help us continue to have a sustainable community. And that's why, as we continue to move forward in this program, I want to invite you to join the Community Solutions by making a gift to Family Services today. So there's some of you here at one point in time that worked in the insurance industry. And in the insurance industry, when an agent came out and had a conversation with you, there was a phrase known as the go for the close. Going for the close is asking you for the money, right? It's asking you to write your signature on the dotted line so we can collect the check. In all seriousness, there is a pledge card. I've already completed mine that's on your table. We ask that you take time to review it. Any contribution, large or small, is very helpful, and I'll be sharing more about that with you later. So while you aren't thinking about your next appointment, you've got a nice cookie dessert on your table. There's a reason why we save that sweetness for last, right? As we ask you for money, please locate your pledge card. You know the reason you're here today, and that is to support the efforts of Family Services. So take a moment now to consider your opportunity. At the end of the program, the staff from Family Services will collect your pledge cards from you. Our goal today is to help us raise the additional $15,000 with the people that are here to get across the finish line. At this time, Tracy and Bob are going to share with you some important information. In December, Family Services announced after a nationwide search, Tracy Ross was named the agency's 10th president and CEO. I can tell you from having just a brief time to sit down and talk with her that she's excited. She's glad to be here, She loves the programs that she found here. They're exactly the ones that she loves to work with as she looked at this particular place. So she's really looking forward to continue to move forward. And we're thankful for Bob, who retired in December after more than 40 years of service in the health and human services sector. If you would, give Bob a round of applause, and to our new CEO. So I have a dear friend that I've worked with for quite some period of time who was supposed to receive an award a few years ago, but there was a small epidemic, pandemic, whatever you want to call it, something like COVID-19 that got in the way that sort of postponed our coming back together. So Joe Crocker was supposed to receive the award, but today he's going to have the opportunity to be recognized. So Tracy and Bob are going to present this award after each has an opportunity to share some remarks.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. It's absolutely beautiful to see the sun coming through and shining on every single one of us here. Where I'm from, the sun doesn't shine a lot, so I'm just blessed to be here. It's an honor to join Bob in presenting the very first Family Services Children's Champion Award to Joe Crocker. As the retired director of local impact in Forsyth County for the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust, Joe has challenged many of us in this room to envision a more sustainable community here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. I'd like to share with you The Veridical Man, 2022, by local artist Ann Bonner, an original piece commissioned by Family Services in your honor. Ann explains, let me uncover it first. Ann explains, with this piece, I wanted to represent Mr. Crocker's commitment to improving the education of all children and his willingness to stand in the gap while holding together the necessary components to complete such a monumental task. In order for work of this magnitude to be accomplished, one must tear oneself apart, giving all for the betterment of others. Additionally, one must have sincere care of, openness to, and heart for others. In this abstract interpretation of interconnectivity, Mr. Crocker is firmly grounded. His hands extend off the canvas to illustrate his enduring legacy, and his beautiful soul shines.
Good afternoon. Veridical Man is a fitting title for this work of art, but for the few of us who are not familiar with the word veridical, it is defined in various dictionaries as truthful, real, and genuine. Those adjectives well describe Joe Crocker. While the artist provided an explanation for her work, art is made for audiences to add their creative interpretation to the experience, and Veridical Man invites a lot of creative interpretation, which is fitting for a person as multifaceted as Joe. I'll share with you something of what I see about Joe reflected in this piece. Two things stand out for me. The first is Joe's boundless capacity for establishing relationships and connections for the benefit of the community. Joe is one of those people that we accuse of having a twin, so ubiquitous was his presence in meetings across the community. I have no doubt that everyone in this room, and in Forsyth County for that matter, either knows Joe or knows someone who knows Joe. That's one degree of separation. And anyone who knows Joe is the better for it. The second feature of this piece that speaks to me is balance. I had the privilege of working closely with Joe on several projects that the Trust funded at Family Services. Now, the power imbalance that a grantee often feels in relationship with a funder was non-existent with Joe. He worked with you as a colleague with a unique ability to offer guidance and suggestions without imposing his views. Joe was always approachable. You could bring any idea to him, but you had better be well prepared to answer his astute and acute questions. Joe would always celebrate your success. His only response to your failure was that I hoped you learned something from it. Mostly it just felt right and good being with Joe. I think it has something to do with his smile, which lights up his entire face, with beaming eyes that express his generosity of spirit and the compassion and love he has for people, and especially for the thousands of families and children who have benefited from his service to the community. Friends, it gives me great pleasure to invite Joe Crocker to the stage to accept the inaugural Children's Champion Award.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's overwhelming. Thank you very much, and to the artists, I am thrilled and beyond words. But thank you all for being here, and thank you for this opportunity to come for this belated, as Nigel has spoken about. Bob mentioned this award to me, I guess, at my retirement dinner from the Trust in 2019, December of 2019. We had a conversation about this being talked about. And that was the last time until a few months ago that Michelle started contacting me about they're going to do this eventually. So, but as odd as it is, and it is odd because I haven't been involved in this work now for over 3 years, but I'm still very, very close to it. And this work would not have been possible for me had it not been for the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust and what the Trust allowed me to do in representing Mrs. Reynolds and the staff of the Trust in the work that we do here in Forsyth County, particularly the work in early childhood education and through our Great Expectations work that is still going on. A very close friend of mine in eastern North Carolina, Willis Williams, has always said to me, Joe, the road to success is paved with education. And starting that educational process, paving process, early in a child's life is the best way to make sure that that success is achieved. There is no greater use of resources in our community, I believe, than to support efforts around early childhood education and what it's doing for our neediest children. That process really should start early in every child's life. You heard earlier about the impact from Tiffany, the health sponsor, about the first 5 years of life. And that is so critical to a child's development. The first 3 years of life is totally critical to a child's life. And if we're not careful to overlook that, then we won't achieve the kind of things that we know the society is capable of achieving. So we want to make sure that particularly those children from financially disadvantaged backgrounds have these resources to make sure that they have the opportunity to thrive and achieve those great things. I just appreciate the opportunity, for me, being recognized in relation to this effort. The pre-K priority has started under the funding from the Trust, and it is still moving forward. I'm glad to see the work continuing. And as I said to Bob at my table, the only thing I ask for is that the work quickens. The pace needs to quicken. Children that are going without these resources now are being, mistreated, if you would, because the resources are there, the will is there. We just have to get ourselves together to organize an effort to make sure that this happens and happens in the most efficient and economical way. So thank you very much for the work continuing. Thank you very much for this beautiful art piece. I appreciate Family Services. I appreciate the board and staff, and also to the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust for the support that you all have given me over these years that I've worked in Forsyth County, and for the work that you all will continue to do as you move forward in this early childhood education work. Thank you very much.
What a legacy. It is now for that time in our presentation where we're going to hear about ACEs from Dr. Rob Anda. Dr. Anda is from Atlanta, Georgia, and he graduated from Rush Medical College in 1979 and received his board certification in internal medicine in 1982. During 1982 to 1984, He completed a fellowship in preventive medicine at the University of Wisconsin, where he also received a master's degree in epidemiology. He spent 20 years conducting research as a medical officer in the U.S. Public Health Service at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. His research involved a variety of areas, including disease surveillance, behavioral health, mental health and disease, cardiovascular disease, and child determinants of health. He played the principal role in the design of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study and served as its co-principal investigator. He has presented findings from the ACE study at congressional briefings and numerous conferences around the world. The ACE study is being replicated in numerous countries by the World Health Organization and is now being used to assess the childhood origins of health and social problems in more than 30 U.S. states. He has more than 200 peer-reviewed and government publications, such as the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report and book chapters. In addition, he has received numerous awards and recognition for his scientific achievements. He and his work are highlighted in the documentary Resilience by Jamie Redford that was accepted to the 2015 Sundance Film Festival and is now being shown across the nation. Dr. Anda now works in his role as co-founder of ACE Interface to deliver training materials at the state and community level about neurobiology, epigenetics, ACEs, resilience, and community capacity development. His dream is to help create a trauma-informed nation. His role as designer, writer, and communicator about the ACE study over the past 25 years and how it has evolved into national movement provides unique insights and perspectives for professional and lay audiences alike. Please help me welcome Dr. Anda.
Wow, it's one heck of a crowd here today. Thank you. You know, I noticed the word heal back here. And so while I was sitting down there, I was thinking about that word. I've come to use that word a lot as I've done this work. And the healing that I'm thinking about occurs at multiple levels. The healing that occurs at the individual level, when we understand how trauma and adversity work, and we can let go of shame and blaming ourselves for things that happened to us that we didn't have any control over. I'm thinking of the healing, and I'm thinking about children. I'm thinking about healing adults too. That healing adults so that they can understand themselves better and understand their experience and use their experiences that they're healing from as an asset to transmit to their children or the people they serve. And I'm thinking about systems that we have that need to heal. Things where there are policies and practices that were developed before we had no understanding about trauma and abuse and neglect and adversity. So the healing, I think, can occur, and I can assure you that I'm seeing that happen. I'm seeing the healing occur at all those levels as I've done this work for the last almost 30 years now. I've had to heal my own mind because I didn't understand any of this when I got into it. I've had to learn. I'm still learning. And I see communities beginning to heal. And so I talk about how understanding this can help to build healing communities where individuals come together and the systems that serve them come together and heal and provide what people need and stop injuring them more. So I saw some of you this morning, so this is your second time. I hope the second time is better than the first. But this is one of my favorite photographs called The Walk to Paradise Garden. And I like to show this when I present because it reminds me how much I love my son and daughter. They're older now. They used to look like that. But it's their journey. It's the human journey of development and moving forward in life and how we gather up all our experiences and how they influence us in the way we think and the way we treat each other and the way our bodies function, the way our brains function. And we want them all to have that bright future where that full potential that they've been embodied with is reached. And the hard part of this is looking at the shadowy part around them. We want the bright future, and we hope for that, and I see that future as possible, but we also have to be willing to look into the darkness. I had to do that, and I was not prepared for how much darkness there was in our culture, how much trauma and adversity there was that our children experience, and the way that it affects them. But the promise, the hopefulness, and I want you to walk away hopeful, is that now that we understand how common these things are and how they work and how they affect people, we can begin to prevent the cycle of abuse and neglect and domestic violence and sexual violence and all the things that are so common in our culture and we're letting they're so common around the world. So I talk about this idea of self-healing communities, and I have seen this happen. It's not a fantasy. I've seen in communities in the state of Washington use this model and sustain it for 10 or 12 years and watch multiple public health problems come down simultaneously. Things like teen pregnancy, juvenile arrest for violent crime, and other things went down simultaneously in communities that sustained the teaching and brought the information and healing to individual people who then took it to the children they're working with and into the systems that serve them. So the biggest gear, and I sort of use this machinery thing, gear, the momentum, the energy that we transmit to each other. The most important gear is the population affected by ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, because every survey that's been done everywhere around the world shows that the majority of every population surveyed has experienced one or more adverse childhood experiences. I also believe that the healing that occurs at the individual level empowers people to use their experience as an asset because they understand best what it was like to have those experiences and are motivated to serve and prevent it from being transmitted to the next generation. And then there's these systems gears, that I talked about, the systems that need to change and heal. And the idea of this is this information can get those gears turning in a clockwise fashion, which I consider healing direction, and stop the many things that are moving the gears in a counterclockwise direction that injures people more. And we have a long way to go with that. But I've seen these kind of changes occur, so I hope you'll walk away hopeful from this presentation and take this to where you work, take this to your families and anybody that you interact with. I want to talk about the biology of this. I think that learning about the biology of how this works helps with understanding and empathy for people that have been affected by adversity. So when I talk about adversity, I'm really talking about stress, the biologic stress response, the fight or flight response that we've all heard about. And that fight or flight response, it involves the release of chemicals that are good for us when we need to survive. But if it's activated too much, it becomes sort of a poison, especially to our developing central nervous system, the neurons in our brains. And the most important one is cortisol, which is a steroid hormone released from our adrenal glands that's a part of the intermediate response to stress that helps us get by not just in the short term, but in the intermediate term when we're stressed. But if those stressors are unpredictable or severe, they lead to more vulnerability, and that's a biologic vulnerability. If it's predictable or moderate, we tend to be less vulnerable. We all get wounded in our own ways, but some of us are more vulnerable than others, and some are less vulnerable depending upon how much stress we've experienced. And what we've learned since we originally did this work, this epidemiologic work, is what happens. We now know that the cortisol influences brain structure and function. And the brand new science called epigenetics that I'm going to give you an introduction to in a few minutes tells us that our experiences modify the way our DNA is used It doesn't mutate the DNA. It modifies the way our DNA is used. This is from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. The two black frames on the upper left-hand corner, if you can see that, there's a normal healthy brain cell there. It's colorful, it's branching out, ready to make a lot of connections. In the lower panel is a cell that's been exposed to what people call toxic stress, or a lot of adversity. That's the result of the influence of repeated exposure to cortisol on the cell. In animal studies, high concentrations of cortisol can actually kill brain cells. And then on the right, you see in the panels, there's one little tiny slice from one of the axons of those nerve cells, and it has lots of buds on it. That's where it's getting ready to reach out and make a neural network with adjacent cells. So a healthy cell can do a lot of that. The one that's damaged by toxic stress has less ability to take information from our senses and build a healthy neural network. Epigenetics. Epigenetics, it's the most amazing thing that I've ever heard in terms of understanding biology. This is going to be a new era of understanding our bodies and how they function. So let's start. We have our chromosomes at the bottom. It has to be tightly packed and well organized because our DNA strands are about 6 feet long. And you can imagine this little tiny space inside the nucleus of a cell. That's a long thing to go in a really small space. So it has to be wound up and tightly coiled and stay organized. And then it has to unfold so the messages, the DNA messages, the genes can be read. So this diagram shows that unfolding. As it unfolds, and you see the little yellow balls, those are little protein balls, and the ribbon of DNA is wrapped around those balls. And then as it expands, you see the large yellow balls. Those are called histones. Those histones get to the point where the DNA is about to be read at the top. You see the genes at the top. So I think of a gene, I use my hand. It's like, it's a little sentence, a little message to, we have about 25 or 30,000 of those in our DNA, messages for cells. It tells the cell to perform a function, or make a protein, make insulin, or get ready to divide. So we have all of those messages that need to be presented to our cells to function well. And on those protein balls, you may not be able to see it, but there's little orange cylinders that show a chemical attachment to the DNA that blocks that highest level of unfolding so the gene can be presented to the cell and give the message to the cell. Those chemical attachments to DNA are constantly changing in our bodies. And what we're learning is that exposure to trauma and adversity can influence when those DNA genes are blocked by that chemical attachment or when they're unblocked. Does that make sense? So the opening and closing of the ability of the DNA to show the gene to the cell is affected by adversity and trauma. There's amazing breakthrough in the understanding of the biology, and I think it explains why when we did our study, the epidemiologic study of adversity, why we found so many things in public health and well-being and students and student learning and now many other things, why these experiences can have a vast array of outcomes probably lies in that locking and unlocking of the DNA code and how that difference, large differences or small differences between people depending upon what they've experienced, probably explains the many findings I'm going to tell you about. So that's epigenetics, right? Epigenetics. And we're now learning that adverse childhood experiences influence gene expression. So the memory of our experiences gets stored in our bodies. It gets stored in the way our brains grow and function, and it gets stored in the way our DNA is read by our cells. This is what we call the adverse childhood experiences pyramid. On the left of that, there's a vertical arrow that represents our lifespans going from top to bottom. So imagine time flowing through the pyramid. And I'll note at the bottom left it says preconception. And we used to say conception. Now we say preconception because we're learning that the epigenetic changes of, say, my mother and father or my grandparents or my great-grandparents, their experience gets embedded in the way their genes are used, the chemical attachments. Those chemical attachments can be stable when sperm and egg are formed. You with me now? So if that's true, then I can inherit the biologic experience of the people that came before me. And there's now many studies showing that that type of inheritance can occur. So that's why it says preconception. At the very base of the pyramid are the things that have a great influence on how much adversity there is in any community or population, and that includes historical trauma. You know, the legacies of slavery and genocide, and then the tendency for these adversities to pass from one generation to the next. So adverse childhood experiences tend to flow up through this pyramid, creating social, emotional, and cognitive differences, health risk behaviors, disease and disability, and social death. And where there is a lot of adversity, people tend to die too young. And we now have the data to show all of this. And this is all the influence of neurodevelopment, epigenetics, and the word adaptation is there. I don't know how many of you know the term being trauma-informed, what that means. But one of the base understandings of being trauma-informed is understanding that when somebody presents with something that doesn't seem right, that our society judges, that they have a biologic adaptation of their experience that helps them to survive in the environments they grow up in. And so part of it is understanding the biology helps with the compassion that we can treat each other with when we see people influenced by adversity and trauma. So here's what we did. We measured 10 forms of adverse childhood experiences. And there are many forms, and people are adding more. Things like historical trauma, community violence, structural problems like racism and other issues. But these were the 10 that we thought of when we designed the study. The first was household dysfunction, growing up where there was substance abuse, parental separation or divorce, to represent the fact that there may have been relational stress in that household, having mentally ill caregivers, witnessing domestic violence, or having a person in your household incarcerated when you're growing up, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, and emotional or physical neglect. That's important because what neglect is when we don't experience something that we need, the brain doesn't wire it. In order to wire up, we have to have the input necessary to develop that function. So neglect is not getting enough of what we need. We studied those 10, and this was a new thing to look at that many different kinds of experiences, and we quickly saw that those ACEs don't occur in isolation. They tended to cluster. So this is the way that I talk about it. If you were one of the 17,000 people that we studied, and you told us that you grew up with household substance abuse, your chance of having one other of the 10, so the first stressor is the substance abuse in your household, your chance of having one other on average as a group is 80%. So you have two stressors. Your chance of having 4 or more is 60%, right? So that gives you at least 5. So we're talking about multiple stressors, more and more stressors, and the clustering of diversity that tends to occur where there's one form of dysfunction, there tends to be multiple forms simultaneously. So we created the score. We just counted up those 10. We didn't know what else to do. Literally, we were just winging it. So we added up those 10 and created an integer count from 0 to 10 of the number of experiences that people reported. And now that we know the biology, which we didn't know when we first saw the data, we know the biology. I think of that score from 0 to 10 as the biologic stress dose, the total dose of stress, the chemistry of stress during childhood. When we did that scoring in our cohort, only 1 in 3 people had an ACE score of 0. 26% had one, and as many as 16% had four or more adversities. So the ACEs are common, they're highly interrelated, and you can create a scoring system, a simple scoring system that measures the cumulative exposure to the biology of stress. So let's go back to this ACE pyramid idea, how at the base of the pyramid, adversity can tend to create things that we want to prevent. So I'm going to start with mental health and substance abuse. Here we have the relationship of the ACE score to a self-reported history of addiction. The height of these red bars is the percentage of people in the study cohort who reported an issue with addiction. For an ACE score of 0 on the far left, it was about 1%. It jumps to 2%, it doubles to 2% for a score of 1, triples, quadruples, and for ACE score of 5 or more, people are 10 times more likely to report an issue with addiction. And we see a similar pattern here for the ACE score and its relationship to whoever attempting suicide. This is what we call dose response. That's why I talk about the score as a stress dose. These are the most powerful dose response relationships that I've seen in preventive medicine and epidemiology. And we see them over and over and over. There are now hundreds of graphs like this that I'm not going to present. But this dose response pattern for many health and social problems persists over all kinds of health and social problems. Here, for an ACE score of 4 or more, people are 20 times more likely to attempt suicide than those with no ACEs. And they're a pathway to disease. Here we have liver disease. And you see the familiar staircase dose response pattern. And this is the idea that we thought of when we designed is how one thing may lead to another. We know that ACEs lead to more alcohol use. They lead to intravenous drug abuse, where people can be infected with the hepatitis virus that way. And it also influences sexual behaviors. And sexual behaviors can transmit the hepatitis virus. So one thing leads to another, and there's a higher risk of liver disease that's related to childhood experience. And this is decades later. And here's coronary heart disease. So are you seeing the familiar pattern? Right? It's an undeniable pattern. This is the leading cause of death in this country and in developed countries, and it doubles for people with high ACE scores. So ACEs increase the risk for many chronic diseases. When we first published this, there was this incredible, gee whiz, you mean what happens in childhood leads to these kind of diseases 20, 30, 40, 60, 70 years later. And what it did is, I think of this list of diseases here, all these major chronic diseases. I see that as a Trojan horse, because I don't want us to focus. As adults, we want to focus on chronic diseases that affect us. What it did is it got people interested in thinking about kids. Does it make sense? People who are interested in cancer prevention and heart disease prevention and lung cancer and liver disease, they start, you mean what I've been working on is about kids? And they'd always thought about adults and things that happen in the later decades of life. So it drew people in to thinking about what we're talking about today. And here's a partial list of some of the other things that some of them happen earlier in life. ACEs influence adolescent and reproductive health, things like teen pregnancy, the health of pregnancies, smoking and obesity, body weight issues, drug use, sexual behaviors, mental health, the risk of violence and re-victimization later in life as an adult. And that includes being a perpetrator or victim of domestic violence, or a perpetrator or victim of sexual violence. The stability of relationships, the ability of adults to work together and create a stable relationship for children, and the ability of people to go to the workforce and have the physical health and the emotional health to be able to go to their job and perform on the workforce in a way that people expect them to work. So the self-healing communities model involves these systems. And I'm going to talk briefly about the education system and the impact of ACEs on student learning, the ability to function in the school systems as they're structured now for children. This is from a study by Dr. Chris Blodgett at Washington State University, who was able to get ACE scores from children in elementary school in Spokane, Washington, by asking the adults about the children. The children were not asked, but he got proxy ACE scores for those kids from people who knew the children well enough to know what they were experiencing. So kids with 3 or more ACEs were 3 times more likely to experience academic failure, 4 times more likely to have poor health, 5 times more likely to have difficulty getting to school, which wasn't really their problem, right? But attendance drops where there's a lot of adversity. And severe behavior problems were 6 times more likely. This picture is a picture of a high school classroom. I don't know if you can see it in the back, but there's rows of desks. And there's 30 students. This is from a statistically representative sample from a survey in the state of Washington of children that were asked anonymously about their childhood experiences. In the top row of this classroom, there would be 6 students that have an ACE score of 0. And as you move down the classroom, there'd be 5 with 1, 6 with 2 ACEs, 3 with 3, 7 with 4 or 5, and 3 students with 6 or more adversities. And so if you stop and think about that for a minute, I didn't know any of this when I got into this. I'm thinking, and now that I've talked to educators and worked with educators and I'm learning it, what does that mean for these kids in those classrooms when the classrooms are built with sort of everybody does the same thing, everybody gets the same thing, everybody learns the same thing in the same way, in a tendency now for a one-size-fits-all classroom. Who's going to do well? The top row, right? And it's going to be increasingly difficult for the bottom row. And so this is part of the idea of the movement for trauma-informed schools. And I know I have a good friend who's a teacher in Atlanta, and she has like 35 students in her class. Most of them don't speak English when they come in. I'm like, I say, Nancy, have you seen this stuff about AIDS? And she's like, oh man, ask me to do one more thing, and I know it's hard, but I think we can figure out a way over time to be able to do things differently in schools, so that the kids that are having difficulty with attendance and behavior, or who learn differently, or have difficulty learning, or don't have executive function skills. Executive function skills are learned, right? I mean, our brains learn executive function by seeing it and hearing it, and so those are all these different manifestations that these children have in classrooms. In this classroom, 42% of kids, this is an average classroom in the state of Washington, have 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. So let's talk about the justice system briefly, or the prison pipeline. The people, when I talked this morning, this biologic pressure of a high burden of adversity in a human population is a tremendous energy. It's an energy driving this pipeline of kids into the juvenile justice system, because how do they adapt? Using drugs, right? More likely to have mental illness or emotional issues, and that brings them into contact with the justice. Those are the 2 most important things. And adverse childhood experiences account for the majority. They cause the majority of issues with substance abuse and mental health issues. So that's what this table represents. On the far right, these numbers in gold are all about 70% from 4 different studies of kids that are in the juvenile justice system. Different studies, different kids, different methods, but similar results. On average, 70% of kids in the juvenile justice system have a diagnosable mental health disorder. And where do those come from? Right? Where do most of those mental health disorders come from? And of those kids, 72% of those kids with mental health disorders also have a co-occurring or comorbid issue with substance abuse. So half of the kids in the juvie justice system have both. And that is primarily caused by the biology of adversity. And these are adaptations, right? If we're trauma-informed, we understand that those kids adapt to what they've experienced by doing these substances. So being trauma-informed, if you haven't heard that, I didn't know what that meant. This was years ago. I was at a meeting in Madison, Wisconsin, and I did a presentation, and someone asked, do you want to come to our trauma-informed working group? I had no idea what that meant at the time. I thought it was going to be a treatment algorithm, because I'm coming from the medical field. I like algorithms. Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And it's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of looking at the people around us that says, I see something, I see a behavior in you, I see a characteristic in you, and rather than judging it, I want to know your story. I want to know the story behind what I'm seeing. And that's the idea of adaptation and compassion and stepping back and looking at the people around me differently. So here, the example I like to use is cigarette smoking. In our study, we saw that people with high ACE scores were much more likely to become regular daily cigarette smokers by age 12. And when I saw that, once I learned that ACEs cause anxiety and depression and difficulty concentrating, I thought, well, when kids start experimenting with cigarettes, the ones that have more adversity and have those symptoms are getting a treatment. They're inhaling the smoke and they're getting nicotine, which is a potent neurotransmitter that makes all those things better. It reduces anxiety and depression. It helps people concentrate. That's why it makes it hard to quit, because it makes life better. It makes life better. So it makes sense. They may not understand that, but maybe even semi-consciously or subconscious, they will repeat that behavior because it works for them. It's not because they're stupid or dumb or they haven't seen the pamphlet in medical school, right? It's not about health education. It's about adaptation and the functional responses to the biology of adversity. So it's understandable. So ACEs lead to adaptations that have a downside, including physical health. We've seen liver disease and smoking and lung disease and all those. They also have adaptations that lead to a downside when children and adults interact with systems that don't understand why their behaviors or issues are there, and they punish them and reject them. My partner, Laura Porter, calls it the reject-eject society. When the societal expectations are not met, we reject and eject people for adapting to their experience. So I've talked about the biology of adversity, and this, our biologic nature is expressed when we experience adversity. And I'm going to go into my beliefs just for a couple minutes. This is not science. This is one of my favorite pieces of art. It's called The Kiss. And I'm a total rank amateur in theology and philosophy, but I have read a little bit. So anybody who knows it, please excuse me if I'm misusing it. But one of the first things I learned is that the idea that we are embodied here. We come into these bodies on this earth, and we have, for one most important reason. And that most important reason is to love each other, to give to be able to give love and to receive love. And so I think part of what happens here is the injury that occurs to our spiritual and human nature that occurs when we experience adversity. And the other thing is that we come into this earth and these bodies with a consciousness or mind. I'm not sure those are the same thing, but there's a big debate about that, the nature of consciousness. But and that our minds and our consciousness is built to seek truth, not facts and figures, but truth, the truth of who we are as human beings, and to be able to express that in relationship to each other. And so I'm going to show you a couple things, couple diagrams here, that understanding that part of human nature and teaching this information, I've seen this happen. People have these aha moments where they reframe. They reframe their experience and they reframe what's happening in their lives, and that they're empowered by this kind of information. So there's three faculties of our mind or our consciousness that are really important. We have reason, we have our memory, where we have a story about past things, and then we have imagination, where we have a story about our future. Now, I don't know about you, but when I use my imagination, I imagine things that almost never happen, right? A lot of times, the things that I imagine are not very positive. I'm like, why do I do that to myself? Does anybody else do that? Like, so the issue here is that our capacity for reason is less powerful than our memories and our imagination. Our reason is so easily overwhelmed. That's true for me. When I learned this, I'm like, yeah, that's right. My memory and imagination can overwhelm my reason. What does that have to do with adverse childhood experiences? Is that adverse childhood experiences and their outcome tend to be stored in memory in certain ways that include, what happened to me was my fault. Children will experience in their memory that what happened to me was my fault, even though I had no control over what was happening around me. And I am ashamed. I feel shame about what happened to me. Or I may feel shame about how I adapted. And I'm afraid. A lot of fear in my back. I'm carrying a lot of fear. I'm in trouble. I can't shake off that fear. And a sense of hopelessness. And then in imagination, a tendency that I'm stuck. I'm in a fixed pattern. I can't, how do I change this? I'm just coping. I'm just trying to get by. And there's a sense of hopelessness that goes along with that. I didn't show that, but the graph between ACE scores and people reporting their lives as hopeless looks like the suicide graph. So there's hopelessness. And what I believe, I've seen this happen, and we have some videos of people reporting this, that understanding all of this can be part of the healing journey for individuals who've experienced a lot of adversity. And I believe it enables us to use those faculties in a different way, and it locks the power of those faculties to consciously reframe a new narrative. I adapted. That's a new way of looking at myself. What happened was not my fault. This is the memory part, right? I remember it now. It's not my fault. I am not alone. Trauma and adversity tend to create a sense of isolation. And I think I believe that when people see this information and see that ACEs are common, the majority of people have at least one, they see themselves, they see their story, go, there's a lot of people like me in this room. I'm not alone. And it's not my fault. And some kind of belief that I'm good, that I'm divine, I'm good. I'm a divine creation. And using forward-looking, the idea of hope. The idea of hope. I can create new patterns in my life. And I can find hope, meaning, and purpose in my experiences. Now that I understand all this, I can find purpose. My experience is not wasted. I think it's, I don't know Buddhism, but I think they talk about suffering, and one of the reasons, suffering without meaning is the worst kind of suffering. But if I can find meaning in my experience, I can then use that to empower me. And the most common thing that I hear at the podium at meetings is I'll have somebody come up to me who's parenting and say, I wish somebody had told me this 20 years ago. I understand how this works, and I'm going to do whatever I can not to pass more adversity on to my kids than I had. So it creates an incentive to use experience as an asset. And I can seek truth, and I can love and be loved better. I told the people this morning, I was at the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming a few years ago and did a presentation pretty much just like this. And a woman, she's about 40 years old, a Native American woman came up to me, and she had tears streaming down her cheeks. She was happy, but they were tears of joy. And the only thing she said to me is, "Thank you for this presentation. Now I can love my mother better." So I think, I didn't do an interview, but I assumed what she did is she reframed her mother. You know, all of the trauma that her mother experienced, and I don't know what she was experiencing with her mother, but she was able to look at her mother and say, "Oh, she adapted. I understand what it is that's so difficult with her, and now it's easier for me not to reject her for the way she is, the way she treats me," whatever was happening, and I unlocked her ability to love her mother better. So why is the ACE study so powerful? It creates a common language. And part of the hope of this is our culture is absorbing this information now pretty rapidly. And part of revolutions of new information is there has to be a common language. When we came up with this idea of ACEs and calling it ACE, people will use that. After a presentation, if they've never heard it before, you hear them talking about ACEs and ACE scores. And the conceptual framework that goes with, it's important to have a clear understanding of what that means so that when we're transmitting this information to each other, it's reasonably accurate. So that framework is ACEs are common, they're highly interrelated, they tend to pile up and accumulate. The cumulative biology of exposure to stress. They account for a very large percentage of health and social problems. The highest percentage is for things like substance abuse and mental health issues and domestic violence and suicide. Those ACEs account for 50 to 80% of those things, and for many other things. But those are the ones that are most caused by adverse childhood experiences. And we now have this biologic understanding from neuroscience and epigenetics. I think that really helps to know the science. Because the science, I think, helps to create curiosity, and it helps to enable more compassion if I own systems that serve people. So there's this unifying effect. I'm about to close here, a unifying effect. I've seen, over the years now, I've seen people from all different walks of life, people from all different scientific disciplines, all different service systems, begin to understand that we're all in this together, and that what I'm trying to work on, if you succeed, I succeed. And trying to figure out how to share fiscal and human resources to prevent adverse childhood experiences because of this array of things that they cause. Mental illness, addiction, domestic violence, disrupted families and relationships, suicide, chronic illnesses, school failure in all the ways that manifests, crime and mass incarceration, poverty, homelessness, health disparities, violence, and early death, dying too young. So I'm going to end here. I want to come back to the ACE pyramid idea. My colleague, Dr. Folletti at the Kaiser Health Plan, and I, we jumped into this because we wanted to go into primary prevention. Not secondary, right? Secondary, tertiary prevention, where you enter at the top of the pyramid, which we want to do. Of course, we want to treat things that are there, and we want to alter things that have gone wrong, but that tends to be very expensive. We cannot spend our way out of this problem. We can't spend our way out of this problem. We have to prevent our way out of this problem, and it doesn't have to cost a lot. I believe that when the point comes in any community where the majority of people understand this information, that community will change. People will come up with new ideas. They'll use their creativity. They'll use their person-to-person differences in the way they parent, the way they treat each other. Policymakers and legislators will create new policy because they understand that those gears in their community are moving in a harmful direction. And it doesn't have to be prescribed. It just happens. I've watched that happen. It just happens spontaneously. So those two questions, are we slowing or halting the progression of adversity? That's the reject eject. Are we stopping reject? Are we stopping suspending kids from school, expelling them from school? Are we stopping the incarceration of people who have mental health and substance abuse problems? And are we reducing the intergenerational transmission of adversity? Those are some of the examples of primary prevention modalities that I see emerging where communities learn this information and get those gears turning in the healing direction on population scale. And when they occur on population scale, all of those problems in time will shrink simultaneously, all of them, because they all have the same cause. Common cause, preventing the transmission of adversity from person to person and from systems to people. So it's time for me to end. I want to thank you for everything that you do for children and families, and I want to thank you for inviting me here to do this presentation today. So good luck, and
We can tell that Dr. Anda had a lot to share because they had to change the mics out. Can you hear me okay? All right. So let's give Dr. Anda another round of applause for that outstanding presentation. So one of the benefits of being an MC is that you get a runner show. If you know Michelle, you know that the runner show is something like this. It's a whole lot of information. We come down to the end to land the plane. I'm trying to condense it down to this. So just a few things that we'd like to share with you now. How many of you learned something new as you listen to this presentation? What I challenge you to do is just write down one thing that you learned right now, and how can you use that to continue to help the organization and community move forward with this issue. I learned about ACEs. I know about ACEs, but I see it differently than when I came in. I understand from the presentation about building self-healing communities, about that journey of development, and the one that really sticks out, Doctor, is the biology of adversity. That's amazing, right? And really what comes to mind for me and the challenge that I would offer to everyone here as we're about to leave is a quote, favorite of mine, by Marcel Proust. And the quote is, "The real act of discovery is not in finding new lands, but in seeing with new eyes." It's all about perspective. It's about looking at the same thing and seeing something different. You've heard about stress, but when you see a slide that talks about the biology of stress, and you equate that to the number of ACEs, and you equate that to connect it to the number of people in that classroom, you see differently the same thing. So reframe, have a different perspective from what you've heard today. We are asking for you to make a gift, not to consider to make a gift, not to think about making a gift, but to make a gift. There's a pledge card on the table. We ask that you fill it out. You can make a pledge. You can use your debit card. We'll take cash. You can use your credit card. Complete it, put it in an envelope. Someone will collect it from you as you go out. To get across the finish line means raising an additional $15,000. And I think everyone here would like to assist the organization in crossing the finish line today. The good part is an anonymous donor has made a $5,000 donation, and what that means is if everyone here today gave at least $27, we can cross the finish line. Now, I know you want to give more than that, so I'm not trying to lower the standard, all right? I'm just saying we have a sizable contribution, which enables us, if you give at least 27, to get us across the finish line. So we ask that you give today, that you complete the card, that you put it in an envelope, you give it to one of the staff members. Finally, as we leave, first of all, we welcome Tracy again to the community. She's been here, I think she said, all of 4 months, enjoying the temperature and the sunshine coming from northern New York. So we're glad to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to come. Thank Bob for your 40 years of service, plus over quite a period of time, for what you have done here and what you will continue to do. I don't think you're actually retired, you just aren't working there any longer, right? But you're here. If anyone knows who's put on something like this before, it takes a lot of people to do it, right? Sponsors and presenting sponsor make a difference because it enables the organization to actually have the event to ask you for money to be able to do some of the things that he's talking about there. But there are people behind the scenes. So you saw a person just come up and change the mic. So you see those people over there, they're operating the technology. Give them a round of applause for the job that they do. We don't often thank the people who set the table, who bring the food, who take up the food after it's over with. And so while things were going on, they were walking around picking up, taking away, setting the tables up, getting the tablecloths, the chairs out. I don't know where they are right now, but give them a round of applause. They deserve it as well. And last, we recognize a number of folks. Foundation Board of Directors, Family Services Board of Directors, the leadership giving donation individuals earlier, but there are also staff members here who also play a major part, and oftentimes we overlook staff, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting, and what you see is what happens here. This is the end result of a lot of work of a lot of people. So staff are here, wherever you are, please stand up so we can acknowledge you and give you a round of applause. Thank you. So with that, thank you very much for being here today. Complete that card. Michelle's going to be standing over here by the elevator. So as you go out, that's the only reason you can get out is that you give her that pledge card, right? Take your cookie with you. Hope you enjoyed the day, enjoyed the fellowship and the sunshine. This is the day. Rejoice and be glad in it. Thank you all very much for being here today.